Hello, hello. Good afternoon and a warm welcome from my side to this roundtable discussion. We're going to talk about the transposition of the CSDDD or the CSDD. So we're talking about the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And obviously, I'm not going to sit here by myself, so I'm going to invite my fellow participants. I'm going to start with Nancy Thomas. Nancy Thomas, she's the director of the IMS. IMS stands for Inspiring More Sustainability. Yeah, wherever you want to sit. Karima Hammouche, she's a lawyer here in Luxembourg, and she's a board member of the European Environmental Bureau. Then we have Caroline Omari Lichuma. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Human Rights in Erlangen-Nuremberg, and she was previously at the University of Luxembourg. Hello. We have Francesco Tramontin. He's Vice-président of Global Public Affairs at FERRERO. And last, but definitely not least, we have Jean-Louis Zeien. He's coordinator of the Luxembourg Initiative pour un devoir de vigilance. So good afternoon to you all. You all have mics. They should all work. So you can say hello to everyone.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening.
Good, yeah, nearly good evening. So basically, I want to give you a first introduction round because they all have much longer titles than the one I gave you, and they can explain to you a bit more who they are and how the CSDD might affect their work. I think I'm going to start with you, Nancy Thomas. So, can you explain to us who you are, what you're doing?
Yes, of course. Hello to everyone, and I'm very happy to be there with you tonight. So, first of all, IMS is a non-profit organization. IMS means Inspiring More Sustainability, and we are active with the corporate sector on social responsibility. So we have different activities, meaning we work with companies and different stakeholders in the country on sustainability. And of course, talking about human rights, we are active on the topic since a long time. Just to give you some things about what we are doing. For 10 years now, we have trainings that we develop specifically for purchasers. So we have a club dedicated where we train purchasers. We have developed a training 5 years ago with Fairtrade and l'ASTM. It was the first training in the country, so it was a 2-day training for companies. And each year now we have a program with 5 or 6 dates dedicated to human rights to train also companies. So it's a service that our association gives to companies. And we published in 2022 the first guide called Human Rights and Entreprises, a practical toolkit on due diligence. It's 80 pages dedicated in English on the topic here in Luxembourg, so I can just say use it and see it. And 2 years ago, we have launched an academy, so the Sustainability Academy. And in this academy, of course, we propose training on human rights to all companies in the country, not only to our members.
Karima Hammouche, I think you have the longest title, which I abbreviated the most, so please give us a bit of an overview of what you're doing.
I try to be concise. Well, good evening, everybody. I am a lawyer, and I'm specialized in environmental law and family and inherence and sustainabilities and the solvabilities, and I am a member of a board, executive member of a board of EEB. It is the European Bureau of Environmental System, and we compose it with 118 organizations, ONG. And we are lobbyist ONG, and we try to push the legislative, European legislative. Well, I think it's nothing else.
I think the rest we're going to find out as soon as we are headed for our discussion. We're going to Ms. Lichuma. She's, as I said, a postdoctoral researcher. What is your main work, your main research?
Thank you very much, Annick, and good evening, everyone. So I am researching on developments in business and human rights, especially in terms of regulatory developments. So not just what's happening in the EU with the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, but what's happening in Africa, for example, within the context of the AU, what's happening at the international level within the context of the binding treaty, a potential binding treaty on business and human rights. But of course, I'm here today because of my interest in the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. I've been following very closely from the beginning of the process. It's been a roller coaster, as I'm sure it has been for most of you. And I think my key way of approaching the discussions is what I call the third world approaches to international law perspective. So a global south perspective. I don't just look at the directive as this great new thing. I also really try to critically analyze its potential impacts on global south stakeholders.
Over to the next person who's working for a company everybody knows, I guess, Ferrero. So I don't need to say a lot about that, but you can explain to us a bit more about your work, what you're doing, and how the CSDD might affect your work.
Yeah. So I'm responsible for public affairs in Ferrero. It says global public affairs, still half of our business is in Europe, so that explains a big focus on European legislation. And compared to other companies, we still produce a lot in Europe and ship over the rest of the world. So all the European legislation is very material for us. I think this new breed of sustainability legislation is what we call is the compliance of the future. So what was food safety, quality legislation at the beginning of the year 2000 is what's now shaping up to be. And it's, as I was saying before, it's the right thing to do. My job is really twofold. I mean, half of me is a lobbyist. That's where I bring the company's interests to external stakeholder and policymakers. The other half is the opposite. I bring the outside world in the company and convince our colleagues that things need to be done differently. CSDDD has both of these aspects.
Thanks for the honesty about calling yourself a lobbyist. Not many do that.
It's not a bad thing. Eh?
No,
I think it's part of the process.
But many don't assume, so I thank you for that. Jean-Louis Zeien, I think most people here in Luxembourg do know who you are, and if not, you can give them a bit of an overview what the initiative is doing.
Better to speak about the initiative. So I'm co-coordinating together with Pascal the initiative pour un devoir de vigilance, formed of 15 organizations from civil society, engaged since 6 years for corporate responsible behavior and conduct. And what did we do in these 6 years? I'm not going to speak about all of this, but we have participated in preparing a draft for a bill which has been deposed in the Luxembourgish parliament. This was one really important moment, and also drafted a business statement where 50 businesses here in Luxembourg signed for an ambitious legislation on national level. So this is part of what we have done in the last 6 years on national, but also on European level to promote responsible business conduct.
Let's stay a moment with you in the current trend of political deregulation. What makes this directive, the CSDD, so special? Or what makes it differ from other directives?
Well, there is indeed a difference between this directive and a lot of other directives. For companies, it will be more than only reporting. You have to take really concrete measures to prevent tragedies with human rights and environmental harms linked to their activities. So I think this is a real challenge. But just to give you a very concrete example, we had human rights defenders from Brazil, from Mexico, and from South Africa a few months ago here in Luxembourg. and they came together with affected communities, representatives from affected communities, where are serious human rights and environmental harms, and what they wanted to meet the companies, ArcelorMittal and Ternium. The difference between both companies was ArcelorMittal was receiving them, met them, which doesn't say that already the problems in the communities are solved. But on the other hand, you can see the other company, Ternium, no way, no answer, despite several demands to meet them, despite the fact to share with them a lot of questions. And this is not in accordance with the guiding principles of human rights. And what can you do? Nothing. So this, in future, will change. At least you will have a supervisory authority where you can address such questions if, and we have heard already, Carol spoke also about it, of stakeholder engagement. So clearly, we need this stakeholder engagement, and to come from compliance to engagement, and from engagement to a real participation of all stakeholders. So that's one of the challenges, and that's why we think that it can give the opportunity also for victims when violations take place to have access to justice. And just to quote one of those human rights defenders, for interrupting cycles of violence where the rights of populations are downgraded. And she said also, given their experiences, that voluntary principles which have been less than effective.
That's a very positive outlook you have as well on the effect of this directive. Let's go to a company which will feel this directive. I feel it's safe to assume that Ferrero will feel the effect of this directive. How do you rate it, generally speaking?
The effect?
Yes.
I think it's huge impact and big effect. I mean, there's a compliance effort that will hit the company first. I mean, as much as we are in favor, as I was saying before, there's a lot to do in terms of adapting policies and governance. And that will be the initial effect. Long term, as I was saying before, I think we truly believe will help us do business the right manner, and it's based on already good foundations. So.
Caroline, Jean-Louis, he had quite a positive outlook on this directive. Do you think that it has an actual chance to change something real, or do you think it's more of an alibi directive to, you know, make people or make the side of human rights fighters sound a bit more, you know, to calm them down and to give them a little bit of something?
You're putting me on the spot, Annick.
I'm so sorry.
I accept the challenge. I think that the directive has both potential for opportunities, as Jean-Louis mentioned, but there are also challenges as well, right? So in terms of, let me be pessimistic first before I give you my real cynical view of the directive. I think that at least now having a directive that imposes hard obligations on companies, we've come to a point when companies are not going to, you know, comply with human rights and the environment out of, you know, to use a term Francesco used, altruism, right? They'll do it because it's now a legal obligation. That's important, because when there's a legal obligation, there are consequences for failing to follow a legal obligation. So now stakeholders can use the legal language and the legal tools to be able to try and hold companies to account. But my more cynical view of the matter is that sometimes I feel there's an over-focus on due diligence as process, right? So now it's becoming just another normal part of process within the companies, that companies should do A, B, C in order to tick the boxes and say they have complied with due diligence. And I always feel like there's the potential of losing sight of the purpose of these laws. they're not being made just for fun or just to give companies a hard time, make things bureaucratic for them. The laws are being made in order to change the lived realities of stakeholders who are suffering violations of human rights and the environment, and to potentially, impact climate change measures and all of that. So if we over-focus on due diligence as process and forget that actually the focus, at least for me, and of course, spoiler alert, I'm a human rights lawyer, as you can see, I look at due diligence as a proxy for the achievement of human rights and better protection of the environment. So there are so many people having the same conversation, but almost in different languages. And my fear is that potentially the CSDDD could then end up being just another layer in a very complex web of regulations geared towards sustainability, but doesn't really translate on the ground.
Thank you so much for your point of view. Let's go to Karima. Karima, do you think that the CSDDD, is it just like the lowest common denominator, or does it have really a chance to make an impact? So it's kind of the same. How do you feel it is? Is it a chance or is it rather like a danger to the companies?
Well, if I have to qualify the directive, I think it is in French expressions, mi figue, mi raisin. That means there is a composite the conciliations between the interest of employer and the interest of the stakeholders and the companies, and sometimes to find a good harmonize between these all stakeholders. It's very difficult because it seems it is opposite interest. But in my mind, it's not the case. Because we could together through these possibilities to find the solutions and to be competitiveness and to protect the environmental issue, to protect the human rights and the climate. It's possible to do this. It is only a voluntary, questions of voluntary. It is only this. Because I mean that company should consider that the sustainability development, it is a criterion of the value market, and the company should not look after or out. The company didn't think that it's not possible to be competitiveness without the protections of sustainability. It's very important to insist about this. And, regarding the directive, it's a precarious balance, and I think it is only a step to wind of change, I think.
Yeah, and we have to say that the directive is the one step, the transposition is the other step, so it might look differently in different countries in the end. But let's come to you, Nancy Thomas. What do you think, or how do you rate this directive? So we have heard different opinions, more positive outlooks, far more cynical outlooks. What do you think?
So, nothing, to be honest. No, because we really see our role to accompany organizations in changing their way to work. So, of course, we are in favor of acting on human rights and to go further than law. So that's the point of view of IMS. But you mentioned it, Caroline, we need to accompany them and to have a good implementation. So having a law can be good, but the idea of what we are doing in IMS is how to accompany them and how to help them to do a real implementation, and then why not going further than law? So we have seen it on other topics that we are working on in IMS, for example, on removing single-use plastic. We have worked with companies and we are now further than laws. So we are really in favor of acting with them and helping them with concrete tools, and we see our role like that.
So you are more of a promoter, you don't want to take a critical look
Yes,
of
but of course the objective of IMS, we talk about sustainability. So of course is to work on sustainability and to change companies to have a sustainable Luxembourg and sustainable companies here in the country.
So IMS tries to make the best of it, that's
Yes.
good. Let's come again to Caroline, because you have had the more cynical outlook, as you said it before. I'm going to put you on the spot again. So the transposition so far, the transposition of this directive into Luxembourgish law is a big of a question mark. So we don't know yet what it's going to look like. What do you expect, or what do you even demand from the Luxembourgish government?
Someone once told me that you don't make demands when you want people to do things, you ask them nicely. I would ask that the government aims for higher standards than what are contained in the directive currently, because like I mentioned during the presentation session, the snapshot session, the directive is basically a minimum harmonization rule. It's setting the groundwork for higher standards if member states so will. So I would ask the government, and some of you who are here are going to be part of these processes in terms of influencing how transposition to go to shoot for higher standards whenever possible. And to give a concrete example, for example, within the context of civil liability, the draft that Jean-Louis referred to that the initiative had come up with and which was submitted to the Luxembourgish Parliament had a provision on civil liability, but it also talked about a reversal of the burden of proof. And this reversal of the burden of proof is, a legal term of art for a situation where in civil cases, when you want to institute civil proceedings, when you go to court as a claimant, all you have to do is show that, you suffered harm, and then the burden shifts to the company to perhaps explain whether they complied or did not comply. This kind of tool would be very, very important to perhaps give some power back to global South stakeholders or stakeholders outside of Europe who want to use these civil liability provisions. Otherwise, imagine bringing a case before a Luxembourgish court. You don't have access to company information. You don't have the financial resources that the company has to defend itself in court. It's really an uphill battle. So this is what I mean by higher standards. And of course, the discussion on the financial sector has been mentioned over and over, given its unique relationship to Luxembourg, but there is room to think about bringing in the financial sector into the conversation on due diligence and the downstream activities of financial actors, right? And this is important because, as Robert mentioned and as everyone has mentioned, if you follow the money, or if you put rules where the money is, that's when most people, unfortunately, are likely to comply. Financial actors have a lot of power and a lot of leverage. If we want due diligence to be as transformative as it wanted to be, I think bringing in the financial sector could be a real game changer in this regard.
We're going to talk about the financial sector some more later on as well. Francesco Tramontin, when you hear the demands, basically, or not, let's not call them demands, but the ideas that Caroline is putting forward, do you agree? Or do you think that goes a bit too far, that's going to be too complex for us to manage?
No, I don't think it's complex. I think it makes sense as some of those elements were part of the original proposals, then watered down, so it was the back and forth. So the only part that I would challenge, and let's create a little bit of a debate here, is, a big watch out is by having one country like Luxembourg just include downstreams or is that the whole harmonization part gets lost. And I think that's the attractive part for business, is the fact that in the single market you have some fairly consistent rules. And that will drive business into this new approach, and then you can start raising the bar. So that's my only watch out, is on the how, is that we risk of alienating and making the bubble explode. We already got it through. So this is the only challenge. The other part, as I was saying before, I know it looks simple and very principled. It's not. And as I was saying before, I'm speaking as a company who has, we already have almost fully traceable value chain. So a lot of the foundations are there, yet there's a lot of work to do to adapt, which is that compliance work. So again, don't underestimate that. It's an important foot in the door. But I think all your proposals are good.
I would want to add something. If the company has to not just check or tick the boxes, but keep thinking about how to improve the way it works, how would you?
But that's what I was trying to explain before. The tick the box is inevitable. Okay, there's going to be paperwork to fill. There's going to be controls. So what brings soul to the check the box exercise, which is compliance. You're a lawyer, so you know there's an importance to checking all the right boxes, is the stakeholder engagement piece. That's what makes the forward-looking thing. That's what's the next level, how we will raise the bar, how will we go downstream. I mentioned before, the downstream for a chocolate company is scary. What is our impact on what people do with our chocolate? Would we know what to do now? Not. If it was including part of our due diligence, we wouldn't be able how to demonstrate due diligence other than checking some of the boxes. But I think once we train these muscles of due diligence, it will bring solutions that we don't see today.
Thank you so much. I want to continue with Jean-Louis. Jean-Louis, when I couldn't ask you to, tell us a little bit if you have demands to the Luxembourgish government. She said you shouldn't put out demands, but
yes.
I think you can. So what would be the demands when it comes to the government? We know that you already, we heard some of those demands before, but can you just give us a bit more than that?
I will try to do it
Not too
briefly.
Yeah.
But what is very clear, it is more than a wish list for St. Nicholas, approaching us very soon. So, no, there are the big five. Big five. Open consultation process, and yes, being ambitious, being at least coherent, contributing to a change of mindset, and allocate adequate resources for implementation and enforcement. These are the big five I want. I can detail some of them very briefly. Consultation process, what I heard today from Bajak from the Ministry of Economy, we seem indeed on a good way, which is absolutely great, and this can allow to take profit of a buffet of measures to make it better. And when I say be ambitious, of course there are things which are self-evident. Transposition has to be properly and timely transposed in national legislation. Nobody will say no to this. But while respecting minimum requirements, member states like Luxembourg have a certain flexibility. And first, let us collect at least the low-hanging fruits by adopting elements where we must be coherent. I can detail this about this, but this is also a question of credibility of the development cooperation of this government. But we can also be more ambitious. Let's take a few examples. Introducing a category of risk sectors to bring more companies in these risk sectors in the scope. Industry of pornography. We have here in Luxembourg some Luxembourg-based porn giants as holdings. Industry of cyber technologies, namely NSO. where have been lawsuits filed related to cases of spyware used against politicians, used against human rights defenders, and we could, of course, extend to other risk sectors. But there is also another point which will make absolutely sense and which will not do any harm to the competitiveness of companies by strengthening the access to justice for effective remedy for victims. I think it was Marion who was speaking about it, to extend the timeline, to bring claims before national courts, which makes absolutely sense. It's impossible very often for victims to bring all these documents, collecting money, etc., passports, etc., in this short time. We can do more than this, really. But also bring representative actions for victims, like it's possible in USA. Recently, Chiquita has been condemned for financing paramilitaries in Colombia, killing 8 workers in banana industry. So there are elements where we can do, and being coherent also. This also means to resist to the pressure which is still being exerted by some, in my eyes, irresponsible politicians and some business associations, not all, which are still trying to water down the directive. And the EU Parliament has set an inglorious example 2 weeks ago on the deforestation regulation in relation to lobbying pressure. So we need a government to resist against all irresponsible pressure, and at least, if I say coherent, and then I will stop, we have ratified several conventions about ILO, on occupational safety on work, on indigenous people. So if we have ratified this in our parliament, well, we have to include it in the directive, otherwise we are not even coherent.
Are you sure that was not the wish list?
No.
So you believe that the current Luxembourgish government is ambitious enough?
I believe in the strength of civil society, together with some engaged business actors, that we will challenge this government.
Yeah.
And then we will see. Because, you know, a few months ago, everybody said there will be never a national legislation. And when the directive risked to fail, there was a motion accepted in the Luxembourgish parliament with 55 members of parliament who voted in favor for a national legislation if CSDD falls. So there can be challenges, and we have to challenge them.
So when I asked about, do you think that this government is ambitious enough, you answered, I believe in civil society. I think that says enough. Just saying, okay.
And the rest we will see in latest July 2026.
Exactly. Karima, I want to ask you basically the same kind of question. So what do you think really needs to be considered to make this directive have a real impact? So Jean-Louis listed already a few things, Caroline listed a few things. What do you think really needs to be considered?
Well, I think there is a problem of the terms used, because you used the terms of chain of activities, and in my mind, if you would to change something, you think the value change. It is not the same. In economic system, the value change have a full applications in the conceptions of a product, the sourcing of a product, the conceptions outside and downstream. And if you speak only value, the chain of activities, we speak only a part of the activities downstream or upstream. And I think if you would like to be ambitious, as you want, it's better to use the terms of value change to have a complete applications of due diligence, not only activities, I think.
Jean-Louis?
No problem. I could even extend and talk about hours of what we want more. I just gave a few examples. And of course, integrating the full and entire value chain would make sense and is even necessary. And I fully agree with this. But there are also other points where we should really and we need to go far beyond.
And the second point, it is the questions of the access of justice. I totally agree with you, because I think if you want to be effective, it's necessary that the victim, it's necessary to change the situations. It's not a due diligence, but it is questions of obligations of results, and to change at the ideal situations, no? And the situations, if you didn't change the situations, it is the victim who prove the three conditions. That means the break, the fault, the link between the fault and the damages, and it's very difficult, as you said, to the victim to prove this, because there is a lot of cost, and they didn't do investigations, and there is, even if there is ONG to do the necessary, I know it, and but there is a second point, because there is a mechanism of complaint, and with this mechanism of complaint, perhaps it's possible to obtain the result of the investigations, and the victim could access to the justice and could obtain the damages, the compensations of the damages.
Mm-hmm. Inspiring more sustainability, so the initiative is definitely not going to make demands, I guess, to the Luxembourgish government, as far as I can see or understand.
No, one demand that we can have is to have more collaboration. So I know that we already have, but to push it and to, because we are active, so we have ideas of who is doing what. We know that we have already initiatives that exist, for example, the National Pact, so there are links between companies and ministries, but we need to reinforce that, because in that pact, actually, I think we have almost 19 companies that are involved, so that's very good to have companies that show that they want to work on the topic. But now we need to collaborate more and to be more active collectively, and to, yes, to create more collaboration. And it's the government that can do that, I think.
So now the next question, I like to make this, you all not start to sleep because it's getting dark outside. So I want to involve all of you now, our audience. The next question is for you. And basically what I'm asking you to do is either to sit down or to stand up. And if you stand up, it means that you think that there is a chance for change with this directive. If you sit down, if you keep sitting down, you think it's going to be a danger for our economy, this directive. So if you stand up, it's hope. If you sit down, it's danger. Interesting. So many hopeful people in here. Great. Right. I was looking at you guys too. Thank you so much. So now it's time for you guys to react to this. So we have a lot of hope here because that was the first person to rise. But is that what you expected? Did you expect for everybody, nearly everybody, I think, to stand up? I'm asking you, the first one goes.
Well, the composition of today, I think it's understandable. It's fully understandable. But it's also in line with the surveys we did here in Luxembourg, where 92% of the population was in favor of legislation even including all sectors. So the good news, you are in line. Unfortunately, there's no member of the government. I would have liked to see what they have done, but anyway, it seems clear on this what are the expectations.
And to be fair, I mean, we are at an event which is promoting human rights and businesses, so I expect people who come here are more interested in the topic, but still, you know, just didn't want you to fall asleep. Still, Francesco Tramontin, do you think that this was to be expected as well?
I think it was, because I think the principles are there. So if you ask it like that, everybody would stand up, everybody would go to Geneva to the business and human rights conferences. I think that the devil's in the details, and especially when it comes to voting specific pieces, I think we need to watch who really stands up. I mean, I wish we would have something like that in Italy when it comes to implementation, and everybody would stand up. So you're all invited to Rome to stand up, please.
Caroline?
I think you should have had a third option.
Yeah.
So not standing, not sitting, maybe
Hovering.
somewhere. Yes, you know, leaning, raising your hand so that you can cover those people who are both optimistic and pessimistic. Optimistic because there really is the possibility of change. I mean, with companies that care, and CSOs that care, and all of us that care. But also pessimistic because it's just such a long and difficult road, and if we don't put in the necessary effort in terms of transposition and implementation, the law could remain a paper tiger. So I think if you had a third category, I'd carry all the people in the room with me, or many of them.
What do you think, Karima? Also happy to see the result.
I'm very happy to see all the people who think to be optimistic, and that the fact that the directive is very important, and it's awareness of the consensus of the people, and for me it's very important to see this, because I'm sure the result it is with the people. And when I see this, I'm sure there is the good possibilities to change and to obtain a good result in finale.
So if politics would always listen to the people, right? We would have a different outcome. Nancy Thomas?
Yes, I'm very happy also, but we have always the same biases. When we do conferences in IMS, we attract people who are interested in the topic. So, of course, not very surprised that the room is in favor of that. Now, how can we all attract, with the power we had in that room, the others that are not in favor?
That's the question, yeah. Well, we're going to see if we can debate on that later on as well. But first off, I'd like to get into the topic that we already spoke about before a bit. Caroline mentioned it, I think Francesco and Jean-Louis as well. The biggest absentee of the CSDD is the financial sector. And I mean, Luxembourg, it is precisely the financial sector that Luxembourg plays an important role in the global economy. And so it's really important that we should talk about the financial sector. If the CSDDD is the first step towards more accountability, what should be the next step, especially concerning the financial sector? And this time I'm going to start with Francesco Tramontin.
I think the financial sector comes with a whole debate around downstream impacts, and it's while on supply chain and obviously on companies' own operation, I think you have the dynamics, you have the structure, you have the networks. I think it will progressively need to build some form of measuring, making it concrete for companies about what to do. I think a good starting point could be the inclusion of the financial sector. Effectively. I mean, I'm not the one who should speak for the financial sector, but I totally see the logic. A little bit to our exchange before. I think this is a journey, so I wouldn't compromise the important foot in the door that we put now. I mean, from the civil society perspective, you expected to keep the pressure, but let's get in. And then the way this is designed, due diligence is designed, not necessarily the regulation, it is a journey. So when we train that muscles, I think time will be mature.
So you think it's going to be a natural step that the financial
I think it
sector
will.
is next?
I think it will. Again, if the level playing field works, I think then it will start highlighting the gaps. So whether it's downstream, whether it's financial sector, which is the size of the companies, I think we'll just need to. We are in for a long journey here, if it really works. So.
Nancy Thomas, you totally agree, I can see with Francesco Tramontin.
Yes, I agree. Of course, I think they will be involved in the future. Of course, it's an evidence. And we see, I mentioned before, the National Pact, and you have many companies from the financial sector who have already signed this pact. So they are involved in it. And when we see what you have to do regarding the law, many financial companies are already compliant with different things that they will have to report. So of course, in the future, in a way or in another, they will be involved in it.
Can I make a funny comment? Just
yes?
Because as you're saying, I'm thinking even as a private company, I mean, we get some of the financial institutions we have a relationship with. They give us like CSR questionnaires like this. Now, wait for them, when this will be applied to us, wait for them to ask us a CSR question and say, you start by complying with the laws as well. I mean, it's...
That's fair.
It will come.
Karima, do you think it's enough?
Yes, I would like to say something because I think during the process of the discussions of the proposal of a directive, the questions of financial sector have been reported. That means, I think, within 2 years, the Commission's disputes about the questions of the financial sector include the due diligence in this financial sector, and it's not excluded directly by the directive. That's the reason why the directive at the 51, I think, preamble point of the preamble said that the financial sector could be operant with the leverage, but it's not excluded. It's absent, yes. Absent. There is. I think some articles speak about the financial sector, but it's not definitively excluded. And there is a possibility to discuss about this, and the Commission's would like to discuss about the situations of the financial sector within 2 years.
Not excluded, but still absent, though.
Still absent, but not totally absent, because, as I said, there is the questions of a chain of activities, and for the financial sector, for the credit, there is the questions of a credit, and for this credit, there is the possibility prior of release the credit to the financial creditor to examine, to check the questions of respect of human rights and the questions of environmental issue.
Jean-Louis Zeien?
Yeah, of course you can consider it as a nice journey, etc. But the only reason where the financial sector is not in is because of lobby. So we have to be very clear on this. At the first proposal of the Commission, at least banks were in. Very limited, and investment funds were in also. So this radically changed because of lobbying. Let's be very clear on this. So there is no other reason about this. And what we expect from financial center is, of course, the same thing from all the other sectors, to have a due diligence across the entire chain of value, chain of activities, to take responsibilities. But the reality will be now very different, apart, of course, from an obligation on climate transition plans. But for the rest, on upstream, it's only minor details. I just give you an example, which everything will make it clear. When a bank buys a few kilo of coffees for its offices, it normally has to ensure then that this coffee has not been produced with forced labor. When the bank gives millions of euros of a loan to companies operating in plantations, in mines, well, no obligation on due diligence if workers are working in forced labor or contribute the company to massive environment harms. So this definitely is a major shortcoming of the directive, as it opens space for really problematical elements which are in the core business of financial sector. So, and we did it from our initiative. We commissioned also a study about investment management companies here in Luxembourg, and no company in either of the benchmarks is able to document full alignment with UN guiding principles. So you can also have some examples to see it. So it makes very clear that there is an obligation for us. And of course, there is the hope and the work, then there will be a review to integrate it. But it should have been done now.
A reaction from Karima?
Well, I mean that if we want to obtain harmonized directive, you should respect collaborations of all the stakeholders. You should respect transparency with the companies to the other stakeholder, and we should respect the proportionality. That means it is the principle of European positions, but proportionality, that means you should respect the interest of all the stakeholders. That means the companies and the civil societies, the ONG, the worker. And to find this, you should collaborations. It is the best way.
Caroline, what do you think should be the next step concerning the financial sector?
I think my work is easy because I'll just say I agree with everyone. And I mean, they've said pretty much everything that I could say. Maybe I'll just conclude by emphasizing what Robert McWorkadale mentioned in the morning about in the earlier session, when the UN working group visited Luxembourg and their impressions of, how the financial sector can be better incorporated in due diligence. And he mentioned the fact that the financial sector is already doing due diligence in various forms, right? Like they do diligence within the context of anti-money laundering or sanctions legislation or anti-terrorist laws or, reporting obligations. So this is not a big ask. You're not asking them to do something new and difficult that is impossible for them to do. And maybe it is a journey like Francesca mentioned, and we can hope that this is a journey that will actually make steps in because they already have the tools there, and I think it's possible for the financial sector to contribute to human rights and environmental due diligence.
But if you already say it's not a big step for them, then it should be okay to ask a bit more, right?
Yes, but remember what I told you. I always start, I'm sneaky. I start with asking for something that seems not so big, and then before you know it, you're actually doing what you should do. And maybe sometimes that's the approach, unfortunately, that we have to take.
Mm-hmm. Give them a little finger and then take the whole hand. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for this debate. I think we are already at the time where I want to make, room for all the people again in this space and ask for people to ask their questions. So we are the question and answers. Anything that pops up into your mind, we have discussed a lot of things. So just here, and I come over with my mic. Oh, I can sit down.
Good evening. My name is Guilherme Brechbiller. I come from Brazil. I'm a PhD candidate at Coimbra University in Portugal. I would like to congratulate the initiative to Devoir de Vigilance for such an amazing event and all the speakers here. Well, my questions, if you don't mind, I have two quick questions.
Go for it.
One is, I'm curious, and maybe Monsieur Jean-Louis Zeien knows, why for franchising companies the thresholds are lower than the other one in the CSDDD? Do you know anything about that? Because for companies will be 1,000 employees and 450 million euros of annual revenue, but except for franchising, I think it's lower the threshold. Well, if you know or someone knows. And for the rest of the team, I have a question because since I'm researching about the CSDDD, since it was a project once, I read in a document that the model based on standards were not going on because front runners could not go beyond because of competition matters. So my question is, do you believe that with the CSDDD, front runners will invest in innovation and push forward as leaders and make it make the level playing field higher and higher, or you think they will be concerned and control the steps on this beyond journey that Francesco Tramontin mentioned before? Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you for your two questions. Jean-Louis?
Just very brief about the difference between CSRD and CSDDD. Of course, this was a question of compromise. Our demand was very clearly to have an alignment to assure intra-directive harmonization on this. And there were even a bank association in the Netherlands, for instance, asking for the same alignment than civil society. So this is one point. And for the second point, very brief, because maybe there are also other responses, we have already front runners. For having front runners, we do not need CSDD. We already have today companies who do really a serious business responsible conduct. But nevertheless, we see also that voluntary measures, the last decades, definitely is not solving the problem. That's why we need more.
Francesco, maybe an answer to the second question, or also to the first?
Yeah, can you reformulate, sorry, the second question is on front runners?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Excuse me, it's because they said that the soft law with standards, patterns, they said, well, front runners cannot go beyond the levels and invest more because they're you know, the rest of the sector will, if they do not, they pay less, they spend less on that, and so ESG or sustainability make it less profitable. So with the CSDDD, front runners can go beyond because they can push the level higher. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, the answer is yes. It's a bit of a simplification of these dynamics. I think the food sector, even if you go broader, smaller, the confectionery sector is a good example. I mean, take markets like Germany. I mean, 90+% of the sector is smaller companies. That wouldn't apply here, for which the limits, at least of the first year, wouldn't apply. So it will be just a bunch of big chocolate companies that would step into that. It is a missed opportunity. I think if you look at specific set standards, I think there's room for saying, oh, you're supporting this law because you want to put out of the market. And that wouldn't be something we would support as well. But the beauty of this legislation, it's conceived as a kind of a continuous movement. So by setting that standard, you bring others in that, yes, they will look at the compliance piece, but it will be less of a competitive streak. It's more just about really a level playing field, as we were saying before. But that component is definitely there, definitely for the food sector because of the big, small element.
Anyone else wants to react? Yeah.
Yes, to my point of view, being an entrepreneur today, you need to be innovative. You also need to have a positive impact on society and also on environment, because you won't exist in the future. So, of course, I think, so personally, you can go beyond laws and you can have specific different models in the economic sector. Now, I think for big companies, it's difficult to change their models because they used to work in a certain way, and changing everything to be sustainable, it's not easy. So we can see it probably in Ferrero, because you are a big company at the international level, and changing, it's sometimes difficult, I think. But that's possible.
Yeah, and not everything in this law is said. Again, the moment of check the boxes and standard needs to be created. It's very open. So I'll take an example which was not mentioned today. So the directive mentioned living income as one of those conditions that needs to be addressed. Now, it's a huge thing, and frankly, we have no clue. So when you buy cocoa, you clearly know basically all your supply chain is in poverty. We need to address living income. The dynamics are not set yet there's room for front runners to show the way. That doesn't put the others out of the market, rather the opposite, actually gives them solutions. So that's a good virtuous cycle if the legislation works.
More questions? No, there.
I allow myself to do a personal observation. So while I'm totally aware, and I also feel the need for keeping, in these times, for keeping the spirits high, I think we all need that. I just want to tell you what I heard last week in different contexts about CSDD from the highest ranked representative of Luxembourgish industry. He called it a perversity, and perversiteit. That's the term that it was a formal meeting, it was a closed meeting, it was not in public, but that's how it was called. CSDDD, not calling it due diligence, but Lieferkettengesetz. And the distinction is important because in CSDDD there's due diligence, a positive connotated thing. Here it was called Lieferkettengesetz and perversiteit. That's the first thing. CBAM, perversiteit, everything is perversiteit. That's the first thing. So I don't think that this is done deal. I think that transposition always, also national transposition, always also reopens up, and those who maybe were not so happy with the level of ambition that is in directive will continue to try to water it down. So let's keep our eyes and our ears and everything open. That's the first thing. The second thing is, last week also, one of the most impacted Luxembourgish company, ArcelorMittal, just like that, unilaterally, just like that, announced that it was putting on ice its European decarbonization projects, just like that, while at the same time having a 2030 decarbonization emission reduction target of minus 35. And when you try to find some kind of rationale for it, I'm obviously now referring to the need under CSDDD to have a decarbonization strategy, not only to have a strategy but also to implement it. A company can simply not, just like that, say, well, we don't give a shit about whatever happens to climate. So I think that as much as I totally get the rhetorics of long journey and so on, and it's understandable, and we have to keep industry in Europe and so on and so forth. Yes, but at the same time, scientists tell us that that trajectory leads us to plus 4 degrees in 2100. So and we're no longer talking about next generation. So this whole discourse about long journey, this is the first step. Honestly, if I tell that to my kids say, are you crazy? Are you crazy? Which world are you living in? So I think we definitely also have to continue to add a sense of urgency to it. And as much as it's very pleasant if everybody gets up here, I think we have to understand and also to accept what it means standing up here. It means profound transformational changes in the way we live, in the way we participate in public life, in basically everything. And so now that there's a consultation starting on CSDD, I definitely, Bajak, that's to you, I definitely would like to talk in the same place at the same hour with business representatives, you know, being heard nicely in our mini sphere of engaged people. I think it's no longer enough. We have to go and get and accept also the tension that there is between short-term interests, which are not ridiculous, between short-term interests of business and long-term interests of parents and fathers and mothers. Thanks.
So I am gonna, there was a commentary, I'm gonna ask a question behind it. Keep fighting. I guess you all agree, right?
I thank you so much for that comment because I felt it, right? And especially thinking about this discussion of the CSDDD as a perversity, these are sentiments that are shared even outside of Luxembourg. If you've been following what's happening in Germany, there's been surprisingly talk of doing away with the Lieferkettengesetz. And that makes no sense because they've already had it in place for 1 year, 2 years now. The CSDD is in, so they're going to have to transpose, and yet political leaders are calling for the Lieferkettengesetz to be suspended, abolished, and all of that. So really, we're not out of the water yet, right? Like, it seems as though we make 5 steps forward and make a couple of steps backwards. So we have to be vigilant in the discussion. And, you know, I just wanted to flag also this new discussion on an omnibus regulation that will combine the CSDDD with the CSRD. And I'm like, I thought we finished this part of the conversation. So maybe, you know, a nice note of soberness to inject into our little gathering here where most of us believe in the optimism of this regulation that we're talking about, that actually we're not out of the woods yet. Political will is still something that is quite lacking.
The political wheel always keeps turning, unfortunately. Anyone else wants to react to this commentary, which was heartfelt, so please feel free.
Well, just to say, it's an excellent example what Pascal was saying about irresponsible business conduct, and which reminds me a colonial approach, and that we have to face this. But with the same person, when I was on the table on RTL, I didn't heard such a commentary. So it depends where people are saying this.
Exactly. Nancy Thomas, we want to add something to the discussion. No? Anyone else wants to answer to Pascal's commentary? No? Because then we have more time for another question, I think. Should be. Oh, yeah, nice.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Alexandre. I'm also a doctoral researcher, and I'm working on business and human rights. And my question is for any of you, basically, how to ensure the complementarity of norms. We have seen since the 21st century proliferation and a huge emergence of legal norms. And when we talk about human rights, we talk about many other norms. And I want to give a concrete example. I'm working on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. For example, if we talk about the right to land or the right to water, for example, and if we have in our head the case of Total Uganda, of course we need to talk about the right to land, the right to water. So my question to you, how to ensure a perfect complementarity of norms when we talk about UNDROP, United Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, CSDDD, Loi devoir de vigilance, Lieferkettengesetz. We have a bucket of norms, but how do we ensure that there is a political coherence between all of these norms and complementarity per se? Thank you.
Thank you, Monsieur Mortelet. So that's a question for our lawyers. I use the plural, right? Lawyers.
Now I'm a researcher. I'm not a lawyer anymore.
Postdoctoral researcher /
Alex, thank you for this question, which I cannot answer. But I think this is a big conversation also that has come out throughout the day, and the fact that it's a very complicated web of regulations, laws, directives that we're talking about here. There's, of course, the risk of a lack of complementarity of norms, as you mentioned it. But I think one thing that could help, rather practically, is these guidances that we talked about. So Article 19 of the directive very clearly states that in the coming years, and I think consultations have already started actually, the European Commission is going to keep giving guidances on how the directive should be interpreted. That's something that could help, kind of tie in all these loose ends that we have and bring the whole universe of norms and regulations together. And related to that, the supervisory authorities will have a lot of power also in this regard, and maybe responsibility, because if you've been following what's been happening with BAFA has issued so many directives. I mean, I've criticized them a lot, but also I acknowledge that they're doing a lot of work in terms of helping to sort of clarify what's going to happen or need to happen going forward, how companies should interpret their obligations, and how these obligations, are interlinked with the other laws and regulations and so on and so forth. So there are no easy answers, certainly, but I think part of these processes are teething pains, and with the guidances, whether from the Commission or the supervisory bodies, things will become clearer and clearer, hopefully.
Francesco Tramontin.
Yeah, and a compliment to that, because we were discussing this at the break. I think guidance is okay, but it's also a good way of politicizing very technical topics. So something we are advocating in Brussels is actually the right infrastructure from an administration perspective to bring member states together and to deal with technical questions in a technical manner. Otherwise, everything becomes a big rethinking of the regulation. I always take the example, I'm like a broken record, European food legislation at the beginning of the year 2000. General food law, it looked like this. Impossible to implement. How will do? How will control? We don't have limits of these contaminants. They created, this is what the less sexy Brussels comes into play, very technocratic, but somehow it works. It creates standards, it lets member states define common rules, figure out what protocols companies should have. This is what we need, not only for CSDDD, but for the whole sustainability legislation. It's the compliance of the future. We'll just need to make it happen at that technical, pragmatic level.
Because you're always talking about, the future, and what I sensed basically from the commentary from Pascal was that the urgency is there.
The future from a business perspective is next year. Eh? My plan is next year. That's where we need to do the budget. So I get your point, but my future is not 10 years. This is
But especially, let's say we have quite a young audience in the back as well. What would you respond to them? Because they'll be like, you guys, we are living here, we have to live here in 50 years when you are, don't want to say all dead, but get my point? Probably. But the urgency that they feel is much stronger than what we give them when we talk about the future, and things will come, and they will come into life in 10 years or in 5 years, or 5 years would be fine, but in 10 years, basically, when you talk about the food regulation, when was that? In 2000? 2004?
No, it was in 2000.
Yeah.
And today, okay, but in the space of 5-10 years, you have a totally revamped way of guaranteeing food security in Europe and standards. So, I mean, I agree, we can debate whether it's 5, 10 or 15, that's fine. This is where regulation come into play. If you want to force it at a certain point, you kind of need to go harder. The fine balance is to be seen case by case. I mean, what you do in cocoa is different from what you do in mining. It's different value chain, as I think Marion was saying before.
Karima, did you want to add something to the complementarity question of Alexandre Mortelet? Or?
I think it's complete.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I think it's complete.
Another question, there were 2 more at least. Yeah. Oh yeah, there as well.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is David Hoffman. I'm from ASTM, and we are a member of the initiative. So I have a question with regard to access to justice and the transparency that is required by corporations in that case when it comes to the burden of proof. We had a meeting, I think about 2 weeks ago, with the rapportrice spéciale pour les défenseurs des droits humains. So the human rights defenders special rapportrice. And for her mandate, the burden of proof is lower. So essentially, if they realize that there is an interest or that a company benefits from the death or the threats against certain human rights defenders, they can already issue a letter of allegation against that company potentially being involved in such a threat or even the murder of human rights defenders. Now with the CSDDD, we have a way of trying to get more justice for those persons in the global south. But how do we really get there? What kind of burdens of proof are acceptable for a company? And therefore my question may be addressed to Tramontin from Monsieur Tramontin from FERRERO. The transparency for corporations is always, I guess, a bigger issue, and now with this directive, we hope from the civil society side that a government or a national point of contact can force a company to produce certain documents, and so that human rights defenders can be better protected, or if they are in fact harmed, there will be consequences. What kind of transparency is acceptable for business? What kind of trends do you see in the business world around this question of transparency when it comes to implications in human rights violations? And do you think that the CSDDD will reach that level of justice that we would like to have when it comes to the human life of a human rights defender?
So I think it does, not directly, but in the way it will oblige us, I speak as a business generally, to update our governance. It will bring more transparency at a very procedural level. It's still a law that happens here. So, I mean, it only can do as much. I mean, for example, in FERRERO, we know we need to update the way we do our grievances procedure, make it more transparent, more structure. I mean, there's work to do, and it's different for everybody. So the answer is yes on the short term of the way it will apply. On the long term, philosophically, I think, again, if we embrace the due diligence process, I think it will bring a more mature conversation when there's an issue. And actually, quite controversially, I'll do an opposite example of something that happened with the German supply chain law. We have a major newspaper publishing an article over allegedly some supply chain violation in our hazelnut supply chain, okay? Then you get the typical article of type of claims and all type of pictures of a journalist going and taking those pictures, okay? With the supply chain law in force, we need to stand ready to justify whether those pictures were taken effectively in a farm where wheat sourced from, and there would be some causality between our business presence and those people whether they were shown in the article. So we could ask the newspaper, well, we did ask the newspaper, please bring us evidence that those pictures were relating to a farm where Ferrero was involved. Legally, we have right to know it. No answer. So I'm sorry, I'm taking a defensive stance to tell you, but the truth is the opposite. I mean, if there's real evidence, it can be brought forward. So I think it allows for a more mature conversation. And that's even beyond the question of reverse of burden of proof, is just more transparent.
An answer by Caroline?
Can I comment? I mean,
Yeah.
Maybe talk about something that we haven't mentioned so far today. Your question immediately made me think about judicial culture, because at the end of the day, it's judges who are going to be interpreting these laws. They're going to be the ones in courtrooms, with litigants in front of them trying to figure out where do we go. And if you followed the experience of the loi de vigilance, it's been rocky, to say the least. A couple of cases have gone before the courts, but most of them unsatisfactory. The judges have been, at least in my estimation, unduly procedural, maybe a little more restrained. Now, I don't know enough about Luxembourgish judicial culture, but certainly for me, going forward with mandatory human rights due diligence laws, I think they require a transformative judiciary also, a judiciary that's willing to not just interpret the law in the old way that we lawyers do it very procedurally, this is the letter of the law. We have to go into the spirit of the law. And that means perhaps, for instance, now coming back directly to your question, the rules on discovery. You can, as a judge, you have the power in your courtroom to acknowledge that companies have more power than right holders. This is a reality of the world we live in. It's not a symmetrical power relationship. And as a judge, you can try to rebalance this power. How? Giving companies very direct instructions, giving right holders more time to be able to access information within the confines of the rules of procedure in the particular country in question. So maybe outside of looking at companies and asking them to be transparent, we can also look at judges and tell them, you need to also be ready to implement these laws fully and truly if we want transparency to happen.
Jean-Louis Zeien?
Yeah, just to add and just to remind this, the position of the former government here in Luxembourg was in favor of the reversal of the burden of proof in favor of the victims. On this, we will challenge this government. So to be very clear on this, on the political point of view. And secondly, I very often hear this in the context of administrative burden. But when I discuss and when I hear what burdens, administrative burdens, victims of violations has to overcome to come to justice here, that's crazy. That's crazy. So I think we are discussing here mostly of imbalances, inequalities between transnational companies and victims, workers. So I think that's a point. We have to be very concrete. And I think there is an obligation of means. There is not an obligation of result in the CSDD, but at least let's make this clear. Obligation of means for me also to be transparent on this. But that's a real challenge also. But there are other elements where we could really improve and do better on the access for victims to justice.
Thank you. I do have time for one last question because I know there was one more question, so I want to let you ask that, and then we have to finish off.
Hello, my name is Esmeralda Wirtz. I work for Amnesty International, but this is more of a personal question/comment. just bouncing on what we were talking about with imbalance of power and inequalities between the victim and the companies. I believe that we can't address human rights if we don't address inequalities in the world. Sadly, the big companies that are today in the focus lens of the CSDDD are also the ones that have gained wealth in an unlimited manner and impoverishing especially Black, Indigenous and people of color. So I think that maybe the CSDDD would be an entry point towards a decolonial and anti-capitalist society. So I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Excellent last question. Who wants to answer first? That's Caroline. Thank you so much.
I cannot resist this question. I mean, and this is a big part of the work that I've been doing. Like, my research really tries to emphasize the fact that these laws are not being made in a vacuum where the parties, the players in the game are equal and the law comes in and everything is perfect. There are historical reasons why companies are as powerful as they are, and stakeholders outside of Europe, global South stakeholders, as I call them, are disenfranchised by, the system. And within the context of this international legal order, if you acknowledge the asymmetries and the inequalities, then you have to acknowledge that the law has to perhaps do more to demand more from companies if stakeholders are able to make use of these kinds of laws. And I've criticized a lot the whole processes through which the CSDDD was enacted. Hardly any involvement of global South stakeholders. You're saying you're making a law to help global South stakeholders, but they're not at the table. They're just recipients of this generosity of, European parliament makers, that we have a law that we're making to help the global South to make conditions better. That's already problematic. But even taking that off the table, going forward in terms of implementation, meaningful engagement has to be front and center of implementation of this law, because as Francesco himself mentioned, if we want to move from this tick box compliance, superficial compliance approach that we mentioned, I think involving and engaging meaningfully with stakeholders, including right holders, has the possibility of not completely eliminating the problem that you described, but certainly helping to rebalance a very unbalanced relationship. So, yeah, I agree with you absolutely that there are all of these colonial, neo-colonial reverberations and power asymmetries and all of that. Certainly the law in itself is not going to be able to change all of this, but it can be a start. But only if meaningful engagement is actually meaningful, and if there is actually engagement.
That's great for a final statement. Thank you so much for that, Caroline. Thank you. Thanks to all the participants for this interesting debate. There's still a lot to say, so we have a final. There's not yet, but 2 more minutes, guys, over there. 2 more minutes. We still want to hear a conclusion to all of this discussion. So that's why I invite you, Benio, to give us a conclusion of today's conference. It's not going to be that long.
Voilà. Oui, j'imaginais que tout le monde est déjà en train de sortir d'ici pour rejoindre la maison. Avec le temps qu'il fait à l'extérieur, il faut partir d'ici en courant, mais il y a encore un mot qui sera en fait. Alors, moi j'ai été fasciné par tout ce qui a été dit, et au fur et à mesure de l'après-midi, je changeais aussi ce que je voulais dire en conclusion. Parce que dans la première partie, vous étiez tous tellement enthousiastes que je me suis dit, mais c'est pas possible. Moi, j'ai pas vécu ça. J'étais longtemps président de la commission consultative des droits de l'homme. Je ne le suis plus. Je parle ici à la place de Noémie Zeien, qui pour l'instant doit être devant un tribunal à faire un plaidoyer. Et ce que moi j'ai vécu dans mes contacts avec des ministres, avec des fonctionnaires, avec d'autres instances, c'était décourageant. Je sortais de là et je me disais, mais ils n'ont rien compris. Parce que nous parlons souvent des interactions avec les ministres, mais je crois qu'il y a beaucoup de fonctionnaires qui, eux, préparent aussi le terrain. Et ce sont, dans certains ministères, des défenseurs aussi du monde économique. J'entends Mme Valère parler, j'ai un autre sentiment, je voudrais l'encourager à persévérer dans tout ce qu'elle croit et dans tout ce qu'elle a à dire. Alors, les situations au Luxembourg, et par certains aspects dramatiques, moi, quand je pense aux 5 000 milliards d'euros qui se trouvent dans l'industrie de fonds, moi, je crois aux légendes, j'aime bien raconter des histoires, mais dire que là, il n'y a pas d'argent qui vient de la traite des êtres humains, de la prostitution, qui vient de je ne sais pas où, de la vente d'armes. Moi, je n'y crois pas, ça. Jean-Louis Zeien a parlé de Mind Geek, n'est-ce pas? Vous savez, le porno et tous ces sites pornographiques, je ne fais pas de plaidoyer contre les sites pornographiques, mais il y a eu des femmes et des enfants qui ont porté plainte parce qu'il y avait des vidéos qui étaient projetées où ces femmes et ces enfants avaient été abusés, violés. Mais le siège financier de MindGeek, c'est le Luxembourg. Luxembourg est la capitale de la pornographie abusive. Et je pourrais vous donner d'autres exemples aussi. Et je ne sais plus, je crois que c'est Caroline qui parlait des nombreux défenseurs des droits humains qui ont été assassinés. Michel Force, que nous avons invité à plusieurs reprises, n'arrêtait pas de parler d'un chiffre astronomique de 4000 défenseurs qui, sur toutes les années, ont été assassinés, et c'est quelque chose de dramatique. Alors, moi je suis psychologue et psychothérapeute, et dans des histoires comme celle-là, de transgression, je m'y ai entendu beaucoup, et donc, c'est toujours objet de discussion, quand les juristes dans la commission évoquaient des lois, et moi je pensais aux victimes, j'étais du côté de la souffrance de ces personnes. Donc je pense qu'il y a une inégalité des armes. Le monde financier est plus puissant. Et quand nous avons des gouvernements comme ici au Luxembourg qui s'investissent dans la croissance économique et financière, qui n'ont pas une vision de ce à quoi cela va mener, les humains ont engagé un combat, une lutte contre la planète. Et s'ils gagnent, ils ont perdu. Et c'est pour c'est pas de moi, c'est de Jacquard qui disait ça. Et je pense que tous ces problèmes qui sont liés à la défense des droits humains sont interconnectés et sont dans une sorte de complexité. Alors, le Luxembourg fait preuve de ce que j'appellerais une avancée freinante, une avancée à reculons comme ça. C'est de faire des compromis qui, pour moi, sont parfois des compromissions, et c'est quelque chose qui est très difficile, en tout cas pour moi, à accepter. Nous assistons actuellement à un niveau planétaire, je dirais, une accélération de l'histoire de l'humanité. Il y a le populisme, il y a des guerres un peu partout. Il y a des atteintes aux droits des hommes. Il y a une mondialisation des atteintes aux droits humains. Et c'est quelque chose qui me touche beaucoup. Je crois que, et là je voudrais faire un plaidoyer et soutenir aussi tout cet enthousiasme qui a été montré ce soir, nous devons toujours garder de l'espoir. Et je crois que les droits humains sont une source d'histoire. Les droits humains, c'est imaginer un monde qui sera meilleur. Imaginer que c'est l'espoir. Les droits humains, c'est une forme exigeante de l'espoir. Et nous devons transformer ce désarroi, que moi, en tout cas, je ressens de plus en plus souvent. Nous devons le transformer en combat. Et ne pas oublier qu'aujourd'hui, nous préparons l'histoire que l'on écrira sur ce que nous avons fait. Et tout notre engagement, ce n'est pas pour favoriser la majorité aussi, mais c'est surtout pour protéger et défendre les minorités. Voilà, je vous remercie.